There was something about Kong that set him apart from the other bullies Moo had faced years ago, when he was just 15 and starting to excel in boxing. His sister had become a promising rookie ballerina, and as her only family, Kong supported her in every way he could, mentally, emotionally, and in any other way possible. Everything was going well until she caught the attention of a creepy stalker. As the man's obsession grew worse with each passing day, he eventually lost control and crossed a line. He secretly followed her, and when she turned into a quiet alley, he decided to make his move to carry out his sinister intentions. Fortunately, Kong happened to be nearby and saw what was happening. Before the stalker could harm his sister, Kong jumped in and, with a surprise attack, managed to stop him before any damage was done. The police were called, and the stalker was arrested, but because Kong had intervened before anything illegal occurred, there wasn't enough evidence to punish him properly. The man was released not long after, but his obsession had now reached a dangerous peak, turning into madness mixed with a thirst for revenge. Before long, the stalker found the girl again, this time in another secluded spot, but now he had brought a kitchen knife, clearly planning something much more sinister. However, Kong showed up once again, seemingly out of nowhere, and stopped the crime. But this time, he wasn't fast enough. His sister's leg was badly injured, shattering her future as a ballerina like a swan with broken wings. Kong blamed the law for failing to protect her and decided from that day on that he couldn't trust it anymore. Instead, he vowed to do whatever he thought was right. His first act was to beat that creepy man within an inch of his life, but that was just the beginning. Kong resolved to handle what the law couldn't. Whenever he came across a suspicious gang or someone about to bully or harm others for no reason, Kong would step in. He'd give them a warning, not with words, but with a not-so-gentle move. Fate had turned Kong into an anti-bully vigilante. He saw fighting not as violence, but as judgment. Thus, the reason he came after Moo wasn't much different. Back in the present, Moo stood there, accepting Kang's preemptive punch without resistance. Even though he was hit by a surprise attack from behind, a blow that could have easily knocked him out, Moo quickly realized it was just a light punch, nothing like the heavy blows he was used to. As a first strike, he couldn't help but wonder if Kong just wanted to test his reflexes or if the punch was meant as some kind of warning. Either way, Moo didn't care. All he needed was confirmation to start the fight, and now he had it. As usual, Moo felt a thrill about being in another fight, completely unaware that this opponent wouldn't be as easy as the others. Kong, however, didn't rush to officially begin the fight. He hesitated, surprised that Moo wasn't running around beating people up for fun as he had been told. Kong had no idea that it was all a lie made up by Hyung to impress him. Moo, on the other hand, had no interest in explaining himself or clearing up the misunderstanding. He casually ignored Kang's questions and told him to stop wasting time with small talk and just do something already. That hit a nerve with Kong, only reinforcing his belief in Hyung's story and convincing him that Moo really was as crazy as he'd heard. Kong did exactly what Moo asked. He dashed forward and started trying to beat him up without wasting any time. Moo, however, stayed on guard, preparing to defend himself like a professional boxer. Kong didn't hold back, throwing punch after punch, but surprisingly, Moo dodged every single one. With each dodge, Moo's confidence grew bit by bit. Seeing this, Kong quickly realized that his opponent was not just all talk like other bullies, he actually knew a thing or two about fighting. So, Kong decided to step it up a notch and use one of his boxing tricks. He threw a light right punch to block Moo's vision, planning to catch him off guard and land a heavy strike using the opening. But to Kang's surprise, Moo had already anticipated the move and blocked it too. For Kong, though, this was just a warm-up. It felt like he had found the perfect punching bag to practice on. He started throwing punches again, but this time Moo could clearly feel the difference in power compared to the earlier strikes. As expected from a champion boxer, Kong used his skills and experience to maintain relentless pressure, refusing to give Moo even a moment to catch his breath. Punch after punch came at him, powerful and unyielding. Moo found himself completely cornered, unable to do much in response. Kong relentlessly targeted Moo's weak spots, making it nearly impossible for him to focus on the fight. Things worsened when Kong found an opening and landed a bone-crushing punch to Moo's side. The pain hit him instantly. It felt like getting kicked in the groin twice in a row. Kong backed off momentarily, allowing Moo to deal with the sharp pain in his side, but not without making a point. He coldly remarked that he was intentionally going after Moo's weak and injured areas because, in his judgment, unworthy people didn't deserve mercy. Instead of feeling scared, impressed, or even angry, Moo, still grappling with his pain, started laughing. This unexpected reaction threw Kong off for a moment but ultimately irritated him. He couldn't believe Moo's response, which only fueled his fury and made him even more ruthless. Meanwhile, Moo had already recognized the vast gap between Kang's strength and his own. It was painfully clear that this guy was on a completely different level. With Lee's body, Moo knew he couldn't match Kong in raw power. However, as someone obsessed with fighting, giving up wasn't an option. Admitting defeat went against his nature. Facing a stronger opponent who didn't fight fair, Moo realized he'd have to adapt and play by the same rules. He just needed to stay focused, sharp, and wait for the right opening. Drawing on thousands of years of battle experience, he recalled a past fight that felt eerily similar to his current situation. It was one of those rare encounters where Moo was nearly overpowered. Even during those painful moments, he never regretted fighting. He always felt a strange satisfaction from the thrill of it. But back then, it wasn't just about enjoying the fight or the pain. Moo wanted to win at all costs, so he forced himself to calm down, momentarily shutting off all his emotions. The creepy grin faded from his bruised face as he began to carefully analyze his opponent's movements. When another punch was about to come straight for his face, Moo made a move. Using his dirty, torn cloak, he distracted Kong just enough to create an opening for himself. The more Moo thought and utilized his tiny bird-sized brain, the smarter and more dangerous he became. In a previous battle, he had managed to capitalize on a similar opening and landed several direct hits on a giant monster he was fighting. To his disappointment, however, those attacks didn't seem to have much effect. That creature was on a whole different level. Despite knowing he was outmatched, Moo didn't stop. He kept using his small brain to find openings while keeping his emotions in check, refusing to give in or give up. He was defeated that day but somehow managed to survive. Even in those agonizing moments, he couldn't help but enjoy the thrill of slipping through the chaos. The situation now wasn't much different, so Moo decided to employ the same strategy, shutting down his emotions and using his brain to try and win. If that didn't work, well, at least he could enjoy getting beaten up. His first move was to shut off his emotions and adopt a sullen expression. However, since he had no idea how Lee's face would look after suppressing his feelings, he forced himself to improvise for the time being. This new expression, combined with his already unattractive features, irritated Kong more than ever. It pushed Kong to the peak of his anger, making him think Moo was mocking him on purpose. Determined to finish things with his raw power, Kong charged at Moo. Moo, on the other hand, acted as if he were just fooling around, pretending to be completely unaware of Kang's approach. As Kong moved forward, throwing punches wildly, Moo stepped back, dodging the attacks as best he could. It didn't take long before his back hit a tree, making him realize he needed to change tactics. Suddenly, an idea hit him. He dug his foot into the ground and, with a quick motion, kicked up dirt as fast as he could. Some of it managed to hit Kang's face, but since Kong was wearing protective glasses and quickly shielded his face with his hands, it didn't do much damage. Instead, it only reinforced Kang's suspicion that Moo was a criminal who deserved a beating. All of a sudden, Moo lowered his head, causing Kong to hesitate for a moment, but it was all an act. Moo smirked and taunted him, asking if he had stopped attacking because he was scared. The jab hit its mark, sending Kang's temper skyrocketing and providing him all the motivation he needed to keep going. Without hesitation, Kong launched another attack, but Moo, with his goofy-looking face, was surprisingly ready this time and dodged the punch with ease. Kong wasn't about to let him off the hook so easily, though. With a sudden move, he appeared behind Moo, trying to attack from his blind spot. Once again, Moo managed to dodge, but this time Kang's fist grazed Moo's chin, causing a bit of damage. However, it was nothing Moo cared about. He was convinced his plan was working. Kong couldn't focus like before. It didn't take long for Moo to notice one of the biggest differences between Kong and the other two opponents he had fought earlier. Kang's fighting style was far more aggressive. Unlike their defensive approach, Kang's aggression, fueled by Moo's mocking behavior, made his moves predictable and easier to block with minimal effort. The ground was key to this difference, and that also explained the real purpose behind throwing dirt earlier, not to actually hit Kang's protected face, but to scatter dirt and small rocks, creating obstacles that made it harder for Kong to move freely. Everything was falling into place according to Moo's plan. After struggling to keep up and getting beaten earlier, Moo was now managing to dodge Kang's attacks again. But dodging wasn't his ultimate goal. He was trying to force Kong to move around recklessly, increasing the chances of him stepping on the scattered dirt and small rocks, eventually losing his balance. Soon, Moo got exactly what he was waiting for. Kong stepped on a small rock, lost his focus, and provided Moo with the perfect opening. Wasting no time, Moo jumped into action, knowing he couldn't afford to miss this chance to turn the fight in his favor. He aimed for a vital spot, but midair, he realized his arm wasn't responding, probably from all the strikes he had blocked earlier. Still, he didn't let that stop him and used his elbow instead, landing a heavy blow. For a moment, Moo wondered why his arm had suddenly stopped working and forced him to use his elbow, but it didn't matter much. The elbow strike turned out to be much stronger than any punch he could have thrown. Kang's glasses shattered, leaving him stunned and completely caught off guard. Naturally, Moo couldn't resist seizing the moment to get under Kang's skin again. He started mocking him, throwing insults and making fun of how easily he had been hit. But then things took a turn. So caught up in planning his next move and taunting Kong, Moo failed to notice what was happening in the moment. While Moo was busy with his mocking, Kong had used his weapon to crush Moo's leg. The unbearable pain hit Moo almost immediately, and he dropped to his knees, stunned, unable to believe what had just happened. Standing tall now, Kong rested his weapon on his shoulder, smirking. It was his turn to mock Moo. "What's the matter? Want to laugh and mess around now, or is this not so funny anymore?" Kong had had enough of Moo. No one had ever annoyed him like this before. In his anger, he decided to break Moo's jaw, ensuring he would never laugh again. Moo remained on his knees, unable to move even an inch to dodge or defend himself. Just before the blow landed, he realized something: he had lost. As he closed his eyes, bracing for the hit, his thoughts drifted to the possibility of tasting failure again after nearly 4,000 years. Kong was ready to remind him of that bitter moment, but just a split second before Kang's strike could crush Moo's head, something, a piece of rock, perhaps, came flying out of nowhere and hit Kong directly in the face. The sudden impact made Kong stumble, and the object rolled away into the trees. Whatever it was, it stopped Kang's attack and saved Moo. Now distracted, Kong quickly looked around, trying to figure out who had thrown it. Things escalated further when he heard a faint, weak voice calling out, "Master," and approaching. Kang's instincts kicked in. As someone who took pride in hunting bullies from the shadows, he couldn't risk being seen. Without wasting any time, he grabbed his sweatshirt, threw it on, pulled the hood over his head, and dashed away before anyone could see his face. As soon as Kong disappeared, a small creature that looked like a monster appeared from behind, trembling as it called out, "Master." Moo turned to see who was calling him, and to his surprise, it was a small lizard-like creature with horns. Recognizing it immediately as the creature he had once raised to a dragon and made worthy of being his assistant, Moo was taken aback by how different it looked now. With no one else around to cause trouble, Moo and the dragonling headed back to Lee's house. Once they settled in, the dragonling began explaining everything about Moo's current situation in the god's realm and his own story, how he ended up on Earth with this body. According to him, after his defeat against Lucifer, the dark entity had found Moo's godly body and trapped it in an unbreakable, impenetrable barrier that separated time and space. This made it impossible for Moo's soul to return to his body. To ensure no one interfered with his plans, Lucifer took Moo's body to his own domain, where he kept a close watch over it, a satisfied smile always on his face, knowing that without his body, Moo couldn't do much against him. However, there was one small problem: Lucifer couldn't easily enter Earth to finish him off. The only way for him to do so was to convince the dragonling to reveal how he could access or enter Moo's planet. Lucifer also brought the defeated dragon to his domain, promising him that if he cooperated and helped him reach Earth to eliminate Moo, he would make the dragon the new god of Earth in Moo's place. Confident that this offer would tempt Moo's assistant into betrayal for a chance at power, Lucifer awaited a response. However, the dragonling didn't give a clear answer. Instead, he whispered something so quietly that Lucifer couldn't make out what he was saying. Annoyed, Lucifer demanded that he speak louder, at least enough for him to hear. Finally, the dragonling spoke up, but instead of answering directly, he pointed at the barrier surrounding Moo. He asked Lucifer if the barrier, which could block time and space, could also prevent attacks from passing through it. Assuming the dragonling was asking out of concern for Moo, Lucifer confidently assured him that no attack could harm or penetrate the barrier. He even emphasized its invincibility and urged the dragonling to give up and consider joining his side instead. Then something strange happened. Lucifer noticed the surroundings starting to brighten. Suspicious, he turned to see what was happening, and what he saw made him freeze. The dragonling's injured body was glowing with a golden light, crackling with energy. At first, Lucifer was shocked, trying to figure out what the dragonling was planning, but his shock quickly turned to fear when the dragonling suddenly shouted, "Massive self-explosion." In that moment, before Lucifer could react, the roof of his castle, the very place he used as the base to control his domain, was completely shattered. In the next second, his entire castle was obliterated, disappearing as if struck by a nuclear bomb. Yet that wasn't even the craziest part. The explosion was so massive that it burned an entire side of the god's realm to ashes. The dragonling had used 99% of his strength for that explosion, and as a result, he reverted to his smallest, weakest form, a tiny lizard covered in smoke and dust. He did his best to escape before Lucifer realized what had happened. Knowing there was nowhere safe for him anymore, the poor lizard had only one option: to return to his master on Earth. But Lucifer wasn't about to let him escape that easily. Emerging from the dust, furious and feeling betrayed, Lucifer stormed after him, clearly angry enough to turn the lizard into stew for what he saw as an abuse of his kindness. The dragonling sprinted as fast as he could, desperate to stay out of Lucifer's reach. But before he could make it, Lucifer summoned a magical spear and hurled it at him with all his might. The little dragonling, now missing part of his tail, was only a few meters away from Moo's throne and the gateway to Earth. Despite everything, the magical spear missed him, and he managed to leap onto Moo's throne, then onto the miniature Earth surface, vanishing from the godly domain and reappearing in Earth's sky, completely drained of energy. The poor assistant didn't even care where or how he would land. He simply closed his eyes and let fate decide for him. As it turned out, fate had chosen him to be the savior of his master. The object that had hit Kang's face earlier, stopping him from landing the final blow, was none other than this tiny, exhausted lizard. After hearing the dragonling's explanation of everything that had happened, Moo fell deep into thought. His now small assistant couldn't help but wonder if something was wrong, but as expected, Moo wasn't sad. He was furious enough at Lucifer that if he ever got the chance to return to his original body, he wouldn't let Lucifer live another second. Suddenly, Moo's expression shifted from anger to excitement as he realized he finally had a chance to fight Lucifer again, a proper all-out battle. Even his assistant, the little dragonling, was startled by how quickly Moo's attitude and emotions could change. Moo sprang out of Lee's bed, buzzing with excitement and finding a renewed purpose to keep going. Deep down, however, he knew he stood no chance against Lucifer in this body. His only option was to work harder and make Lee's body stronger. Unfortunately, Lee's weak, battered body was in such poor shape that even throwing a light punch in the air felt like everything was breaking. Moo couldn't help but wish this new body could heal faster. Then it hit him: he had told the dragonling to find a magical orb for him the last time they met. Turning to the small lizard, he asked almost hopelessly if there was any chance he had brought it back to Earth. To his surprise, the dragonling claimed he had indeed brought the magical orb, though he didn't have a pocket or bag to carry it. Instead, the little lizard had been hiding the orb deep in his stomach. At Moo's request, he slowly began to cough it up, struggling a bit since the orb was larger than the lizard itself. Once he finally delivered it, the dragonling explained that it was a dragon blood stone infused with a one-time healing spell. The little lizard apologized for only bringing one, saying he had been in a hurry and couldn't carry more. Moo wasted no time waiting for his assistant's saliva to dry. He immediately picked it up to examine it closely. As soon as he held it in his hand, he thanked the dragonling, telling him that this orb would be more than enough for now. Without hesitation, Moo activated the orb, releasing its healing effect, which caused it to shrink in size. Moments later, Moo's body was surrounded by a green aura radiating from the orb, and his wounds began to heal instantly. But that wasn't even the best part. Moo suddenly noticed something surprising: the orb's effect wasn't limited to healing. He could feel his muscles becoming more responsive, almost sensitive in a way they hadn't been before. There was only one explanation: the orb must have also been infused with a body enhancement spell, which was visibly improving Lee's weak body. Noticing Moo's impressed reaction, the dragonling proudly admitted that he had personally put effort into it, infusing his own magic into the dragon blood stone. Moo appreciated this as he stared at the leftover remains of the orb, realizing that since it was used on a weak human body, not all of its power had been consumed, which explained the leftover fragment. He handed it to the little lizard, giving him permission to use it for himself. However, the dragonling didn't want to waste it on himself. Instead, he decided to store it for Moo to use later in case of an emergency. Just like before, he carefully pushed it back to its resting place deep inside his stomach. The scene then shifted to a rare yellow lizard on the other side of the city. Surprisingly, it was the favorite pet of the girl from earlier. She didn't see it as just an animal, it was one of her closest friends. She even wished her pet could talk so they would never get bored. Not long after, she stopped playfully teasing her lizard and returned it to its cozy home. She needed to head out, likely to school, and since pets weren't allowed there, she had to leave it behind to live its own life for a while. Peace returned to her home as she attempted to leave, but that day at school was no different. Everything seemed calm and peaceful, no one was bossing others around or causing trouble. Even the beaten-up bully from before was quietly sitting at his desk, now wearing glasses and fully focused on his studies. The pain he endured after facing Moo had knocked some sense into him, and instead of wasting his time, he was now preparing for exams, determined to turn things around. Everything was fine until Moo decided to make one of his usual over-the-top dramatic entrances into the classroom. The moment he walked in, he spotted the beaten-up guy and, without hesitation, asked if he wanted to go for another round of fighting. It wasn't clear if Moo was just messing with him or being completely serious, but before he could get an answer, the president of the student council appeared behind him, acting surprised to see that Lee had actually decided to show up at school after being absent for so long. Moo, with a little lizard crawling under his shirt and causing a slight commotion, casually replied that he was only there because she had convinced him earlier. He added that the only reason he came was to look for someone to fight and beat to a pulp. His intimidating expression and choice of words made the girl wonder what kind of chaos he was planning to stir up this time. However, since there didn't seem to be any immediate signs of trouble, she simply wished him good luck. Half of the day passed without anything exciting happening to make Moo's day interesting. On the floor below his class, two students were chatting about recent events at school. Those two happened to be Kong and a girl from his class. Since he always seemed so clueless about what was going on, the girl was filling Kong in about a second-year student who had recently been humiliated. She explained the details with a bit of gossip flair while Kong listened with mild curiosity, still trying to piece together what had been happening around him. As the school day came to an end, Kong and the girl began walking toward the exit, with her eagerly explaining everything she had heard. According to the rumors, the nerdy guy who used to get bullied all the time had turned the tables on his tormentor one day. He beat the bully so badly that the guy lost consciousness and had to be rushed to the hospital. If that wasn't shocking enough, the nerd had supposedly ripped off the bully's ear in a wild move, earning him the nickname Neutered. At first, Kong had no idea that she was talking about Lee as she described the incident, especially Hyung's appearance and his ripped-off ear, along with Moo's suspicious behavior. But quickly, Kong pieced it all together. There was a high chance that the nerdy guy she was talking about and Lee were the same person. It suddenly hit Kong. Hyung's crocodile tears and his entire act of pretending to be a victim had been a ploy to manipulate him into taking action. However, since it was all in the past and there was nothing he could do about it now, Kong decided to let it go, at least for the time being. On his way back home, Kong didn't realize he was taking the same path as Moo. Meanwhile, Moo was feeling disappointed and frustrated that his day had turned out to be so dull. Everyone at school had been too busy scribbling in their notebooks or on their phones, and there hadn't been a single invitation to fight or even a hint of one. Just as Moo was about to sink further into hopelessness, something caught his eye. It was Kong, awkwardly walking and looking visibly embarrassed as he chatted with a female friend. Since Kong was wearing glasses and a mask to hide his face, Moo didn't recognize him right away. However, something about him felt oddly familiar. His hair color, height, and build seemed similar, but it was the muscle size and form that sparked Moo's suspicion. In just a second, that suspicion turned into certainty. He completely lost control and shouted, "It's that guy from yesterday." His loud voice and sudden outburst caught Kang's attention. Kong turned his head, and the moment he did, he saw Moo charging toward him with a crazed look on his face. Without thinking twice, Kong bolted, running as fast as he could and leaving his shocked friend behind. As Kong sprinted away, he couldn't help but wonder how Moo had recognized him. He was sure that the expensive mask and glasses he had bought were enough to conceal his identity. So why was this lunatic chasing after him? Kong couldn't come up with an answer, but he knew one thing for sure: he couldn't let himself get caught. The last thing he wanted was for this crazy guy to report him to the police or something equally disastrous. Desperate to escape, Kong decided to make an unpredictable move. He spotted an alley up ahead and, without hesitation, veered off his path, jumping straight into it in hopes of losing Moo. Moo kept chasing after him, determined not to let Kong get away so easily. But as he turned into the alley, Kong was nowhere to be found. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. Moo had been looking forward to using this perfect chance to fight Kong, but his hopes were crushed when he realized he was gone. The dragonling popped out of Moo's shirt, asking if that was the same guy who had dared to challenge his lord yesterday. Wanting to help his god track down the rude human, the little lizard requested permission to sniff him out using the strong male scent he had picked up when Kong hit him the day before. Moo gave him the green light, and the dragonling immediately sprang into action, sniffing around like a well-trained puppy. Just as Moo's assistant was fully committing to his new role, someone suddenly appeared right in front of him, stopping him in his tracks. Luckily avoiding being stomped on, the little lizard tilted his head up to see who it was. To his surprise, it wasn't Kong at all, but the president of Lee's class. She stood there, stunned, staring at him with wide eyes. Her shock didn't last long, though. It quickly shifted to a delighted blush as she looked at the adorable little lizard. Clearly, it was her first time seeing something so cute, and she couldn't help but be intrigued. The dragonling had no idea who this girl was, completely unaware that, unlike other humans, she loved lizards more than anything else, forgetting for a moment that he was a demigod and wasn't supposed to be seen by humans. He casually told the girl to step aside so he could finish his task, but things didn't go as expected. The girl completely ignored him and fearlessly scooped up the little lizard in her hands as if he were a stuffed toy. The dragonling was totally caught off guard and struggled to wriggle free from her grip. Frustrated and feeling helpless, he snapped at her, giving an angry warning that he wasn't someone she could just mess with or be rude to. For a brief moment, he wished he had even a tiny bit of his magic left to launch a spell and escape. While the dragonling saw this girl as a nuisance, perhaps even an enemy, the girl didn't feel the same way. In fact, she found him absolutely fascinating. Despite his strange and unique appearance, she couldn't believe she was holding a talking lizard. To her, he was the cutest, most adorable thing she had ever seen, so much so that she instantly liked him even more than her own beloved pet, the one she had always cherished above everything else. Suddenly, the dragonling spotted an opening and bolted, freeing himself and darting behind Moo for safety. Hiding behind Lee's body, he quickly apologized to Moo for failing because of the girl, blaming it on the fact that he had lost all his power. Before Moo could respond, the girl approached him with a serious expression, one that looked downright terrifying to the little lizard. She asked if, by any chance, that tiny creature was his friend. Moo glanced at his visibly shaken assistant and confirmed, "Friend? Not sure about that, but yes, that little one is my obedient assistant." The girl then introduced herself as Kim Yujin, though it was obvious she was a bit jealous that Moo had such an obedient, talking, and let's be real, adorable lizard. Moo could easily read her expression, and although he wasn't entirely sure why she looked so stunned and envious, an idea popped into his head. With a sudden and unexpected move, Moo shifted the leg the dragonling was clinging to closer to the girl and said, "If you want, I could lend him to you for a bit in exchange for a little information." The poor dragonling's opinion didn't matter to Moo in the slightest, and Kim lit up at the offer. She would obviously do anything to hold the lizard for a while. Giving up some information was the smallest price to pay. Without waiting for her to respond, Moo reached down, grabbed the dragonling by the neck, and handed him over to her. "Take him, you can keep him as long as you like, but there's someone you have to help me find." Kim was so mesmerized by the lizard that she didn't hesitate to agree, not even pausing to ask if they were tracking down a criminal, a good person, or something else entirely. That was exactly what Moo wanted to see. Without a second thought, and as if he didn't care about his assistant at all, he casually tossed the little lizard toward her. To Kim's surprise, the poor thing spun midair and landed right on top of her head. The dragonling couldn't help but wonder how his lord could abandon him so easily, as if he were nothing. Meanwhile, Moo didn't waste a moment. He started walking off, telling the dragonling to stay with Kim Yujin for a while and return on his own later. Still in shock, the dragonling tried to ask where his master was planning to go without him, but Moo just ignored him completely, acting as if he had suddenly found something exciting to do after what had been a dull day. Not long after, Kim and the dragonling arrived at her house, and things were a bit awkward. Kim couldn't help but wonder if the lizard was mad at her for being dragged along against his will. Truthfully, he wasn't thrilled about the situation, but since he couldn't defy his lord's orders, he sighed and introduced himself. After a moment, he stretched out his tiny hand and, trying to keep things professional, explained the situation to Kim. "As per my master's instructions," he said, "you'll be actively cooperating with me from now on." Kim was momentarily taken aback at the sight of a tiny lizard trying to boss her around. However, the way he acted and the fact that she could say or do whatever she wanted with him made her heart skip a beat for a second. Still, she didn't want to come off as rude, so she placed her fingers on the dragonling's tiny hand and gave it a little shake to show respect. As she did, she asked, "By your master, do you mean Li Ho?" The dragonling didn't respond, but his silence seemed to confirm her guess. Taking that as her answer, Kim nodded and said she was willing to cooperate with him if that was what he wanted. Then, with a proud grin, she announced, "By the way, I'm the president of my class." The dragonling blinked, completely confused. "What's a president?" he asked, tilting his little head. Seeing his puzzled reaction, Kim chuckled and explained, "It means I'm like the leader of my class, and besides that, I'm also ranked first in my grade." Hearing this, the dragonling's eyes widened in realization. "Ah, so that's why my master chose this girl, because she's an important person." But as this thought settled in, another realization hit him like a bolt of lightning. If this girl was the leader of her class, that meant his lord wasn't. Unable to hold back his curiosity, the dragonling asked, "Wait, does that mean Lord Li Ho isn't the leader of your class?" Kim paused for a moment, her expression shifting as she got lost in thought. After a few seconds, she finally replied, "Li? He's not even an average student in our class. Honestly, he's one of the lowest in everything." The dragonling froze, utterly stunned by her answer. For a moment, he just stood there, trying to process this shocking information. The moment Moo's assistant realized what she had said, he shouted in disbelief, thinking Kim was talking about Moo himself. The idea seemed completely impossible to him. To clarify what he assumed was a misunderstanding, the tiny lizard, now sweating with discomfort and frustration, firmly declared that his master was the strongest being in the entire world, stronger than any god. Acting as if he were still in his terrifying dragon form, he began to boss Kim around again. He demanded that she do her absolute best to help his master become even stronger so he could finally get his revenge. Kim, on the other hand, was impressed by what she assumed was the little lizard's wild imagination and sweet talk about Lee. Amused, she agreed to help, but only on one condition: the dragonling should agree to visit her often if he wanted her assistance. The dragonling paused for a moment, considering her condition. In truth, he had already planned to use Kim as a human source to gather information about what was happening on Earth. Now, her condition was the perfect excuse to visit her more often and get the intel he needed. Without hesitation, he agreed to her terms, and the two of them struck a deal. As the most loyal servant who had sacrificed his life countless times for his lord, the dragonling was determined to do whatever it took to help his master reclaim the title of the strongest. Deep in his heart, he believed every move he made would bring his master closer to his rightful place at the top. Meanwhile, Moo, who was also focused on getting stronger, was busy with some intense, borderline crazy training using his newly strengthened body. Unlike before, when he struggled with even the simplest exercises, now he could handle everything with ease, as if it were no big deal. As the sun began to set, Moo decided he had done enough for the day. Jumping down from where he had been training, he glanced at his body, visibly satisfied with his newfound strength. Not only had he recovered much faster than he had hoped, but his physical strength had almost doubled. Like always, it felt almost habitual. He decided to show his excitement by swinging a punch, but this time, instead of throwing a random punch into the air, he confidently aimed at a nearby iron rod. The results were better than he could have imagined. Not only did he not break any bones, but for the first time, he didn't even feel pain in his hand. For a moment, he was thrilled with himself, but then his happy expression quickly faded into disappointment as he remembered why he had come out here in the first place. He had hoped to see Kong while squeezing in some training, but now that the sun was almost gone, Moo figured it was better to head back. He realized there might be a better chance of running into Kong at school in the next few days anyway. With that thought in mind, he decided to call it a day and leave. Moo departed from the training spot, leaving behind a mark that would serve as a reminder. As he walked through the streets, the disgusting smell of his sweat clung to the air around him. Luckily, no one was nearby to catch a whiff of the unpleasant stench. However, as Moo unintentionally reached Kim's neighborhood, his sweaty scent had gotten so strong that it seeped through the air, hitting the dragonling's sharp senses. The tiny lizard, busy using Kim and her PC to gather information, froze the moment the smell hit him. As expected from a dragon with keen senses, he recognized it instantly. Without wasting a second, the dragonling jumped down and left the girl behind to enjoy her peace and quiet. "Thanks a lot," he called out, waving as he dashed off, now acting more like an excited puppy than a dragon. The dragonling followed the scent trail, leaping from rooftops to walls in search of his master. It didn't take long for his keen nose to lead him straight to Moo. With one final leap, he dashed to the edge of a building and jumped right onto Moo's shoulder, landing perfectly in place. Moo was a little surprised to see him. The dragonling greeted him and proudly announced that he had completed what he thought was his mission. Neither of them realized that in a nearby alley, someone was being beaten up. The dragonling was thrilled to have found a loyal assistant for himself, one who promised loyalty to Moo too. However, his excitement distracted Moo, causing him to miss what was happening nearby as they walked past. After taking a few steps, the dragonling's sharp nose picked up a familiar scent. It belonged to the guy he had been chasing earlier. The little lizard was right, it was Kong, acting like Batman and beating someone up in the shadows. But this time, the guy getting beaten wasn't just some bully or thug, he had stolen a bicycle. Instead of apologizing, the thief started threatening Kong, saying he'd send someone after him if Kong didn't let him go right away. As expected, this only confirmed for Kong that he had picked the right target, so he doubled down. Kong was so focused on dealing with the thief that he didn't realize Moo had appeared behind him, looking thrilled to have found him again. But that didn't last long. Kong quickly sensed danger behind him and turned to see who was secretly watching. As soon as he spun around, he realized it was the same weird boy from the other day, the one who, despite admitting defeat, just wouldn't leave him alone. Everything felt tense, except for the little dragonling, who was facing the other way and clinging to Moo, insisting they were going the wrong way. The dragonling kept pointing in another direction, urging them to head that way. As usual, Moo ignored his loyal companion and focused entirely on the person he had been searching for. Both of them locked eyes, Moo looking determined and Kong unsure of what to do. Moo began moving, taking slow, deliberate steps forward. Kong, on the other hand, tried to explain that there had been some kind of misunderstanding and that Moo shouldn't attack him like this. But Moo didn't care, he was unconcerned about the little lizard on his shoulder or what Kong was trying to say. Suddenly, he quickened his pace, making it clear he was ready to strike. Kong still showed no intention of fighting back, at least not until the very last moment. That's when he realized that if he didn't defend himself, things could go really badly for him. He quickly took a defensive stance, bracing himself to face Moo head-on. Kong had defeated Moo in the past, but this time, his hesitation stemmed from the realization that Moo wasn't the kind of person who deserved to be beaten, contrary to his earlier thoughts. Moo, however, couldn't care less about Kang's feelings. With his fully recovered and stronger body, he felt confident and ready to face him again. Their clash seemed inevitable, Moo was determined to attack, and Kong was equally determined to defend himself. But surprisingly, nothing happened. Both of them froze in place, staring at each other without making a move. Moo had been pretending to attack, hoping to provoke Kong into making the first move so he'd have a reason to officially start the fight, but Kong didn't take the bait. The boxer watching from the sidelines was shocked to see the wild-looking guy who had been chasing Kong suddenly stop, showing no intention of fighting in the middle of their standoff. While Kong was fully focused on Moo, the thief seized the opportunity. With a swift move, he snatched Kang's weapon. Now armed and with a solid excuse to fight, the thief was ready to make Kong regret ever defeating him so mercilessly. He swung the weapon at Kong, shouting in anger and aiming to seriously injure or even kill him. But Kong was faster than he expected. With a quick movement of his legs and a sharp turn of his head, Kong stepped out of the weapon's path just in time. As he dodged the attack, he realized that Moo was now directly in line to take the hit. Instead of feeling relieved that the persistent creep would get hurt, Kong felt a pang of worry for Moo's safety. But it was too late, he couldn't do anything to stop it now. Moo, on the other hand, had been watching the attack closely from start to finish. He could have easily dodged or blocked it, but he didn't. After absorbing that magical orb, Moo had been itching for a fight. If Kong wasn't willing to face him, then who better to fight than this guy? The preemptive strike landed hard on Moo's head. Strangely, though, what could have easily knocked someone unconscious or even killed them left nothing more than a small scratch. That was all the confirmation Moo needed. With an excuse to start a fight now, he wasted no time and retaliated immediately, delivering a powerful kick to the thief's stomach. The force of the blow caused the thief to lose control of Kang's weapon, unintentionally tossing it into the air. The weapon spun for a moment before Moo caught it just as it was about to hit the ground. Without wasting a second, he swung it behind the beaten thief's neck and yanked the man toward him in one swift motion. As soon as the thief was close enough, Moo struck him directly in the face with a brutal headbutt. Moo seemed to revel in the sight of the thief on the verge of passing out from the pain. The man clutched his head with one hand, desperately trying to ease the agony, thinking Moo was finished after that strike. But it wasn't over, not by a long shot. Moo wasn't about to let this guy off the hook without delivering a proper beating. Like a punching bag, the thief endured hit after hit as Moo landed punches wherever and however he pleased. Sometimes, he even used Kang's weapon to make the punishment feel more satisfying. The relentless blows continued until the thief could no longer handle it. He collapsed to the ground, shaking from the unbearable pain, tears streaming down his face as he cried like a helpless child. Moo stood over him, feeling satisfied that he had taught this guy a lesson, never dare to attack anyone else again. However, that smug smile on his face quickly faded as he realized he didn't enjoy one-sided, boring fights like this. It wasn't fun or even a little challenging for him. Moo thought back to how he felt when he first arrived on Earth and fought Lee's bully or even that other guy, Hyung. Those battles were far better and much more interesting than this one. He made up his mind, the only person worthy of being his opponent right now was Kong, no one else. Just then, he remembered that he had come here solely to face Kong in the first place, not to deal with this ugly guy. He quickly turned to see where Kong was, but to his surprise, Kong had completely disappeared. It seemed that Kong had taken the opportunity to make a run for it while Moo was busy with the thief, eager to finish his anti-bullying mission. As Kong hurried away quickly and quietly, he couldn't help but wonder how Moo kept finding him no matter where he went. Little did Kong know that the crazy-looking guy who seemed to enjoy fighting so much was actually a god. Caught up in his escape and trying to shake Moo's excited face from his mind, Kong failed to notice the dragonling. The little lizard looked completely distracted, obsessed with something on the other side of the street. As Kong rushed past, he accidentally kicked the dragonling right in the rear, sending the poor creature flying forward. In such a hurry, Kong didn't even stop to check what or who he had just kicked out of his way. A little while later, Kong arrived home. He stepped inside, casually kicked off his shoes, and sent them flying across the room without bothering to use his hands. His mind was completely consumed with thoughts of Moo and that freaky, pumped-up face of his, always ready to fight anyone. Just then, his sister, who had been outside, walked in teasingly, shouting, "The prosecutor has arrived." Kang's 26-year-old sister, Hina, had decided to switch careers after that stalker case and become a prosecutor with the goal of bringing justice to cruel criminals. Kong and Hina shared the same purpose, but it seemed they had chosen very different paths to achieve it. With a playful shove, Hina pushed past Kong, grinning as she mocked him, saying, "How dare you block the path of a great prosecutor?" Clearly annoyed, like any other brother would be, Kong warned her about the consequences of making him use his powers. With that, everything settled down, and Hina headed to her room to change her clothes, but not before calling out to Kong, asking him to make ramen for both of them since there was nothing else to eat. As Kong stood there, he couldn't help but think about that wild day when his sister got injured. The way she was acting now, so lively and full of energy, made Kong wonder if she had truly moved on from that incident or if she was just pretending. It was something he couldn't figure out for himself, forgetting that day wasn't an option. The next day, while everyone else was peacefully heading to school, Moo was doing the same. However, instead of carrying a backpack or even a single book, he was only holding Kang's weapon, along with the dragonling perched on his shoulder. The poor little creature looked beaten and exhausted, muttering apologies for his failure the night before. As usual, Moo didn't pay much attention to what the dragonling was saying. Some students walking nearby, including Lee's bully, couldn't help but stare at the little dragonling, wondering if it was a Kodo dragon. But none of them dared to get close enough to find out. That's when something caught Moo's attention. It was Kim Yujin, the class president. As soon as she spotted her beloved talking lizard, her face lit up with excitement. She started jumping up and down, clearly thrilled to see her friend again. However, her happiness was short-lived as Moo quickly reminded her that it was time for her to help him with the favor he had asked for. That's when Kim remembered the deal she had made when she agreed to borrow the talking lizard. Moo himself didn't have much information to go on. He only knew that the person he was looking for wore some kind of mask and protective glasses. But that was enough for Kim to instantly realize who he was talking about. She told Moo that she had heard stories about a bully hunter, someone infamous for immediately pummeling anyone who acted like a bully. Unfortunately, Kim didn't have any detailed information about Kong beyond those common rumors, which left Moo feeling a bit disappointed. Still, he was confident they'd cross paths again soon, and next time he swore he wouldn't let Kong escape so easily. What Moo didn't realize, however, was that Kong, the very person he was thinking about, was already there, secretly approaching and observing him from behind. Kong didn't stop there. He leaned in closer, and to Moo and the dragonling's horror, whispered, "Stay in your seat after class. I'll come find you." With that, Kong withdrew his weapon, casually walked past Moo, and continued on his way. Moo hadn't expected to face Kong so soon. It was so sudden that just hearing Kang's voice sent shivers down his spine. Still, despite all his planning to confront Kong, Moo let him go without complaint. Watching how Kong and Lee interacted, Kim couldn't help but wonder if they were friends or if there was something between them that she didn't know about. Gathering her courage, she asked Lee, "Who's that guy, anyway?" Meanwhile, as Moo stood there anticipating his encounter with Kong after class, he watched how Kong got away with just one word in response to Kim Yujin's question, "Bully hunter." From that moment until the end of class, Moo's hopeful and excited expression didn't fade. The idea of finally facing someone worthy of his time made him feel both nervous and excited. To calm himself, Moo kept repeating that he could wait as long as it took if it meant having a real fight. But it was all just an act. His eager face masked the chaotic thoughts in his mind. In reality, he was on edge, so nervous that his right leg wouldn't stop shaking, a clear sign that despite his outward confidence, he was struggling to maintain control. At the same time, the situation couldn't have been worse for the dragonling, who had chosen that very leg to hide under Moo's pant leg and rest during class. Now, he had been dealing with what felt like an endless earthquake since the morning. Finally, the long school day for both the dragonling and his master came to an end. The students, except for the night study group, were free to leave. Without wasting a moment, Moo quickly found the class president, Kim Yujin, and handed over his little assistant, who was clearly feeling nauseous. He told her he had something urgent to take care of. Without hesitation, Kim eagerly accepted the dragonling, almost as if it was the best thing that could have happened to her. She picked up the little lizard and started walking toward the exit, blissfully unaware that if she squeezed him a bit too hard, she'd have to deal with him throwing up right then and there. Without asking any questions or doing anything else, she happily left the classroom. As soon as she was gone, leaving only Moo behind, a hand suddenly appeared from the other side of the room. Of course, it was Kong, who jumped out to make his presence known. The long-awaited moment had finally arrived for Moo, and he realized the time for the fight had come. Kong didn't waste any time. He stepped into the classroom, shut the door behind him, and reached into the depths of his backpack. With a calm yet deliberate motion, he pulled out his training gloves and slipped them on. Moo was a little surprised, wondering if Kong was planning to do the same thing he had done before, using his belt to wrap around his hand for protection and better performance. As Kong put on his second glove, he looked at Moo with a curious expression and asked if he actually loved fighting. Moo's response wasn't what Kong expected. He shook his head and outright rejected the idea, saying he didn't fight because he loved it. Before they could continue their conversation, what Moo truly loved flashed through his mind. First and foremost was the pain and shock he felt when he got hit. For most people, that would be the last thing they'd want to experience. But for Moo, enduring that kind of pain after thousands of years made those moments oddly satisfying. Second was the burning sensation in his muscles, screaming at him after being pushed beyond their limits. Third, for over 3 million years, fighting and battling had been the only thing that made him feel truly alive. With that mindset, Moo believed he didn't fight because he liked it, he fought because it was a necessity for him, a part of his existence. Yet, as he thought about it, his face twisted into a creepy, overly excited expression that made Kong pause. In that moment, Kong couldn't help but think that this guy was completely insane, maybe even a psycho or something worse. Not wanting to overthink Moo's strange behavior, Kong unzipped his backpack again, pulled out another pair of training gloves, and tossed them to him. He acted like he was there for a friendly sparring match, not a fight to the death. Moo let the gloves hit him square in the face on purpose, not even blinking at the impact, but still managed to catch them midair before they fell. Kong calmly placed his backpack in the corner and, with a serious expression, told Moo to put the gloves on. He explained that he wanted to keep things fair, mentioning that he couldn't take a fight seriously unless his opponent looked like more than just some random thug. In an instant, Moo slipped on the gloves and dashed toward Kong, clearly excited to put his new gift to good use. He threw the first punch, and as expected, Kong blocked and dodged it simultaneously. Kong looked slightly annoyed by how hasty Moo was, not even giving him a chance to say what he wanted to say. But he quickly calmed himself down, reminding himself that he had come here for a fight, and this was it, no point in getting upset. After exchanging a series of random punches and blocks, both fighters stepped back for a brief moment. That short pause was all Kong needed to assess the situation and refocus. Drawing on his experience as a pro boxer, he reminded himself that the first thing he needed to do was relax his body and avoid letting his muscles stiffen up. This wasn't just about brute strength, it was about control. Kong took his first step, and that was all the opening Moo needed to charge in again recklessly, going for another attack. But unlike last time, Kong was more than ready. Not only did he defend himself without taking any damage, but he also turned the tables and landed a heavy punch right on Moo's jaw. If that wasn't enough, he used the new opening to follow up with another strike, this time hitting Moo on the opposite side of his face and even harder than the first punch. As Kong looked at his hand, he couldn't help but feel a surge of satisfaction. The power and precision behind his punches amazed him. He was so impressed with himself that he began reviewing, or maybe even replaying, the motion on Moo, almost as if testing it out again to see how it worked. First, he loosened up his muscles, then let the rotational force of his body flow through his fist and fingers, transmitting all that power straight into his opponent's body. Now it was Kong who looked genuinely excited, eager to teach Moo some painful yet practical boxing lessons. Meanwhile, Moo couldn't deny he was impressed by Kang's skill. He realized that if it weren't for the body enhancements he'd received from that mysterious orb, those punches could have done some serious damage. But instead of feeling discouraged, Moo felt even more exhilarated. This was exactly what he'd been craving, a fight that was both challenging and painful. With that thought driving him, he couldn't help but press on, determined to continue what he believed was a proper fight. On the third floor, a red-haired guy was dozing off during the night self-study class. Out of nowhere, his body started trembling uncontrollably, as if he were having a nightmare about seeing a ghost. He jolted awake, looking completely disoriented, as if he had no idea where he was. Once he snapped back to reality, he noticed a not-so-friendly note on his desk, calling him out for always sleeping during class. Without bothering to figure out who left the note, he glanced at the clock on his phone and decided it was time to leave. He grabbed his backpack, stood up from his seat, and a few moments later found himself on the stairs heading down to exit the school. Feeling a bit hungry, the scruffy-looking guy pulled out a snack from seemingly nowhere and started eating. As he reached the second floor, something unusual caught his attention, a shadow moving up and down in the second-year classroom at this hour. It was clearly someone, or maybe two people, but he couldn't tell who they were. That shadow, of course, belonged to Moo and Kong, who were still locked in their fierce fight. At that moment, Moo found himself cornered with no choice but to defend himself. Thinking quickly, he lifted his foot into the air and, in a sudden and unexpected move, planted it firmly on Kang's chest, stopping and surprising him. But that wasn't all. As Kong staggered slightly, caught off guard, Moo aimed to follow up with a kick to his face. Kong managed to protect his face, but it was clear he was furious. He glared at Moo and demanded to know why he had suddenly started using his legs when kicks were forbidden in boxing. Moo, now confident with his newfound strategy, smirked and replied, "What are you talking about? I don't even know what boxing is." Before Kong could respond, Moo leapt toward him, aiming another kick while taunting, "Who said we were only using fists in this fight, huh?" His kick landed hard, pushing Kong backward for a few moments. Kong was visibly struggling, and a part of him even started to believe Moo's words. However, as a trained boxer, he was completely unprepared to deal with kicks. Before Kong could regain his focus, Moo took advantage of his confusion and landed another solid kick. The once dominant boxer now found himself cornered and unable to do anything but defend himself. Kong couldn't help but wonder how someone who looked so weak could deliver such powerful kicks to his upper body. To Kang's shock, Moo suddenly switched tactics and aimed a kick at a vital point in his lower body. Kong froze, completely unsure of how to respond. One thing was certain: if that spot got hit, it would be over for him, and he would collapse, unable to continue the fight. Just as he feared, Moo struck the weak spot effortlessly, but to both their surprise, nothing happened. Kong didn't even feel a hint of pain. Moo immediately retreated, putting distance between them while wearing a smug, knowing smile, as if he had held back on purpose and deliberately avoided finishing Kong off. In truth, Moo had used his full strength in that attack, but the physical enhancement from the dragonling's power had worn off as if it had never existed. Realizing this, Moo started to panic. He knew that without the enhancement, he was no match for Kong. Meanwhile, Kong, still a little surprised, noticed something was off. He knew Moo wasn't the type to show mercy to anyone, yet he still had no idea why Moo hadn't gone for the finishing blow. Then, as if struck by divine insight, Kong smirked and mockingly said, "Don't tell me you suddenly lost your power." Kong had no clue that his random, ridiculous guess about Moo was actually spot on. To him, the only explanation was that Moo was simply exhausted and worn out. He had no idea about the orb or the dragonling's buff. Moo, on the other hand, said nothing and continued to pretend everything was fine, as if Kong were completely off base. But that didn't change Kang's mind. He had already pieced together the situation in his head, which was enough to make him burst out laughing. After their intense fight, Moo looked like he had no idea how to keep going in this chaotic battle. Meanwhile, the red-haired guy standing behind the classroom door was watching them. The sight of two awkward-looking people trying to fight each other while laughing like it was some comedy show wasn't exactly entertaining for him. In fact, it was so annoying that he decided to leave rather than waste any more time on their silly fight. It wasn't clear if this scruffy-looking guy was strong or skilled, but for some reason, watching Kong and Moo's battle left him feeling grossed out. Just as the red-haired guy walked off, Kong finally stopped laughing. His face turned serious as he charged at Moo, knowing this was the perfect moment to take advantage of the situation. Moo, on the other hand, found himself in a tough spot, trying to use his leg to block Kang's attack or at least make it harder for him to land a punch. However, that simple plan wasn't enough to stop Kong. Instead of aiming for Moo's face, Kong went straight for a vital spot that Moo had unknowingly left wide open. Moo thought his knee would serve as a solid defense, but things didn't go as expected. With just one strike, he felt a sharp pain, and being on one leg caused him to spin around almost 90 degrees, creating a perfect opening for Kong. Kong didn't waste any time. He delivered a bone-crushing punch right to Moo's head. The hit was so powerful that it sent Moo flying several meters backward. Even that wasn't enough to knock him out, though. Moo slumped against the wall behind him, realizing that without the enhancement buff, there was no way he could stand up to Kang's solid muscular body. A desperate solution crossed his mind. If he could just use a small amount of his original mana or inner energy, he could easily overpower this opponent. However, having already tried and failed to use his mana several times, that idea didn't seem very reliable right now. Still, Moo decided to take a chance, as even the smallest shot at doing the impossible was better than nothing. He pushed himself up to his feet, gathered his courage, and focused as hard as he could to summon even a tiny bit of magic into his fist before attacking. Putting all his trust in that slim hope, he confidently launched himself at Kong, now relying on his non-existent magic. But Kong, treating it like nothing more than a child's punch, easily caught Moo's fist midair before it could land. Seeing an opportunity to mock Moo again, Kong teased him with a smug grin that, while lively, still lacked any real excitement or effort. Then, out of nowhere, Kong suddenly felt something strange, like energy or a weird sensation passing through his body. It caught him so off guard that he instinctively turned his head to look behind him, trying to figure out what it was. That momentary distraction was all Moo needed. He didn't hesitate for a second and took full advantage of Kang's lowered guard, throwing another punch straight at his face. This time, Moo's punch wasn't as strong as it would have been with the enhancement buff, but for some reason, it hit Kong harder than expected, enough to make him feel a little dizzy and snap him back to reality, refocusing all his attention on his opponent. After that punch, Kong managed to grab Moo's other hand, but once again, he felt a stronger wave of energy passing through his body and moving toward his back. Instinctively, he turned to see what it was that had just passed through him. Whether it was magic from Moo or just some strange sensation didn't really matter. What did matter was that Moo used this moment to take advantage again. This time, he relied on the most dependable weapon in his arsenal, his head. Moo's headbutt struck hard, sending Kong stumbling backward, crashing into the classroom door and collapsing completely knocked out. Moo stood tall and proud in front of him, wondering if his plan to use mana in his attacks had actually worked or if it had all been his imagination. After a moment, he realized that he had somehow managed to channel a small amount of magic into his fist by redirecting a bit of mana into his body using a new method he'd never tried before. Yet, honestly, the thrill of being able to use magic wasn't nearly as exciting as the thought of what he wanted to do next. Now looking like a caveman who hadn't eaten in a year and had just found a feast, was unaware as Moo approached his unconscious face. Moo wasn't planning anything too crazy, he was just eager to leave his mark on him in his own way. However, at the very last moment, fate intervened and somehow woke Kong up, allowing him to save his ear for another day. As soon as Kong came to his senses, he realized Moo was about to mark him like his other unfortunate victims. But that wasn't something Kong, a champion boxer, was going to let happen easily. He quickly shoved Moo away and got to his feet, still feeling dizzy but determined to stop him. Kong immediately admitted that he had underestimated Moo and accepted his loss, but he wasn't going to let Moo rip his ear off. He wanted to say something, probably about the strange sensation he'd felt earlier before getting knocked out, but the pounding pain in his nose and his spinning head made it impossible to form a coherent thought. So instead of explaining, he made a quick excuse and decided to leave, thinking it was best to get as far away from Moo as quickly as possible. Watching Kong walk away, Moo couldn't help but feel disappointed. He had really looked forward to adding Kong to his list of playthings, but it was clearly not going to happen today. Meanwhile, at Kim Yujin's house, the little dragonling struggled under the weight of a bag that looked to be twice his size. It was so heavy that he was already sweating before he even started moving. Apparently, the bag was full of items that either he or his master had asked him to buy. With no other choice, the dragonling braced himself and headed back, choosing the hard way, leaping down from rooftops instead of sticking to the safer paths. As he started running toward Lee's house, the little dragonling suddenly spotted Kong in the distance, looking dizzy and holding his injured face. The moment he saw him, the dragonling immediately recognized Kong as the same guy who had kicked him in the butt the other day for absolutely no reason. There was no way he was letting this chance for revenge slip away. He quickly dropped his bag on the ground and crouched into a ready-to-jump stance on top of it. Then, like a bullet, he launched himself toward Kong, aiming to headbutt him square in the face, just like his master had done earlier. But luck wasn't on his side. Despite his dizzy state, Kong spotted the dragonling at the last second and instinctively threw a punch, smacking the poor lizard midair. For a moment, Kong was freaked out, dazed, and confused, not even recognizing the dragonling. He was left wondering what kind of weird animal had just attacked him. So out of it, he couldn't even process what was happening. Kong considered giving the dragonling a proper beating for scaring him, but in his current condition, that just wasn't an option. Instead, he shook his head, muttered something under his breath, and continued on his way, desperate to get home and rest. As soon as Kong disappeared, someone else arrived at the scene, standing over the dragonling's crumpled body. Of course, it was none other than Moo. He stared down at the dragonling, beaten and sprawled out on the ground, wondering if the little guy was dead or still alive, and more importantly, what was inside the bag lying next to him. The next morning, Moo was walking through the streets on his way to school again, but this time with one noticeable difference: he was wearing a brand new school uniform and carrying the dragonling in his new backpack. The dragonling seemed perfectly content being carried this way. It was definitely more comfortable and secure than sitting on Moo's shoulder or hiding under his clothes. Just then, the dragonling proudly mentioned that Kim Yujin, his royal and ever-reliable assistant, was the one who bought the uniform and backpack for Moo, solely to satisfy him. The dragonling seemed to like his new home and declared he wouldn't come out, wanting to stay hidden and avoid drawing any unnecessary attention for the time being. Meanwhile, Kong was walking down the other side of the street when he spotted Moo. Without hesitation, he crossed over to greet him and, with a curious look, asked why Moo was wearing a school uniform on a Saturday. To Kang's surprise, Moo simply replied, "What Saturday?" Kong felt a little disappointed, or maybe even annoyed, thinking Moo was trying to mess with him so early in the morning. He decided not to argue about it, though, and instead attempted to bring up what he had wanted to tell Moo the day before but hadn't been able to. Kong asked Moo again if he actually liked fighting, and once more, Moo gave the same answer, saying he fights because he has to. It was hard for Kong to believe that, especially after seeing the excitement on Moo's face during their battle yesterday. However, Kong didn't complain about it and instead got straight to the point. He requested Moo to hang out with him from now on, adding that if Moo agreed, he wouldn't feel bored anymore because he wouldn't have to keep looking for fights. As soon as Moo heard that, his whole body started trembling with excitement, and that scary yet thrilled smile lit up his face again. Kong didn't need any words to understand Moo's answer, it was written all over him. It wasn't easy for anyone to change Moo's opinion about someone, but somehow, Kong had managed to do it. Suddenly, Moo felt like Kong might actually be a good person. Everything seemed to be going well for both of them until Moo suddenly blurted out, "Take me somewhere I can fight right now." Kong froze for a second before explaining that he didn't mean they were going to fight immediately, he was talking about some other time. Meanwhile, the dragonling was secretly watching their conversation from the safety of the bag, either trying to stay hidden or plotting how to get his revenge for losing to Kong twice before. Thanks a ton for watching. If you've made it this far, drop a dope in the comments. And hey, why not check out some of the other videos popping up on the screen while we wait for the next chapters? If you'd like to support the channel, don't forget to like and subscribe. Peace.